What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Top 5 wide receivers to sell in Dynasty leagues. There are a number of different reasons on why you want to move on from a player in Dynasty, but the root of everything is their expected future value compared to what you think you can get. The most common cases with this is with big name players who are clearly on their way out, but their name still carries a lot of weight in people's minds, and so they're more willing to trade for them. But we can also see like perceived value being higher than what it actually is. You know, when you look at a team in the offseason, you're like, oh, he's the only guy, or he's going to have a really strong role. But we think they might add someone in free agency, take someone in the draft. Well, then their value is going to take a hit, and we want to move on from them before that happens. So today we're going to look at 5 players who kind of fit into these boxes and that you should consider trading away before their value takes a hit, or just that, you know, we just do not believe in their long-term value, or maybe there's reasons to believe you can get more than they're worth to your team. Remember, if you want to see my exact rankings on all players for Dynasty, as well as redraft this next season, you can get 15% off any package on the website now through the end of April using promo code FFA when signing up. So with that, let's talk about some players I think are being overvalued right now. And we'll start off with Michael Thomas. Now, Thomas is 28 years old, and he's going to be going through a quarterback change this next season. He's also coming off his first season, really, that he struggled with health, and he was really limited even in some of the games that he didn't miss, because he missed a lot of time. But even when he was out there, and especially if you look at that last playoff game, you could tell that he was still very injured, so struggled through that a lot this last season. My thing with Thomas is his combination of risk and upside. I am totally fine assuming a lot of risk in fantasy, even Dynasty, if it means I'm capturing insane upside, right? Because when it hits, I'm rewarded for that. I don't think that's the case, though, with Michael Thomas, you know, and I think that that might be wild to say because, he just broke the reception record, right? Like, if you think back just 2 years ago, he had one of the better seasons we've ever seen. But that start to his career is what is keeping his value higher than it should be. You know, he's universally considered a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty startups. So I'm just going to assume that if you're not in a startup, like you're in a league that's been there for a while, that's still his value, right? Like, you can look at where people are going in startups. That's a very good indication of where you can get them in the trade market in a non-startup league that's been around for a little bit. So I'm thinking you're getting wide receiver 1 value for him. But what if Taysom Hill is their quarterback this next season? And what if Traquan Smith is finally used more? Or if they draft a receiver? Or if Troutman starts taking a larger share in his second season? Because Thomas has been in, up to this point, the perfect situation for years now. For his whole career, he's been in the dream situation, and that's been why he's been so valuable in fantasy. He runs routes that are like 2 yards downfield, and Breeze is probably the best quarterback we've ever seen in the short area of the field. So it was an absolutely perfect match, him and Drew Brees. Their skill sets aligned perfectly. But that was in his prime with a Hall of Fame quarterback. You remove that Hall of Fame quarterback, you now see he has struggled with health this last season. I don't want to call Michael Thomas injury prone, but I'm saying he struggled with health this last year, so he's not immune to that. And he is, like I said, a year older, a little bit older than I think a lot of people think. And I don't care who the replacement is to Breeze. It's a downgrade, especially if they're mobile. Because I'm thinking Taysom Hill is going to be the quarterback moving forward, but if it's not him, it's certainly a downgrade. And if it is him, which seems like the most likely outcome, you know, that's going to limit the overall pass attempts because he's going to scramble more, and you got to think they're going to throw the ball less with Taysom Hill quarterback, and the passing touchdowns because they're going to run the ball in close more, and when they throw it, he's more likely to scramble than Drew Brees. So you limit the overall pass attempts. Of those pass attempts, you know that some of them are going to turn into rushes, and so just everything is limited. The receptions are limited. The receiving yards are limited. The receiving touchdowns is limited. And so when we go back to, like I said, am I assuming some level of risk? Because again, when you change the quarterback, when you get up there in age, when you're the type of player like Michael Thomas who isn't going to go deep very many times in a game, when I have a player who's got some of these risk factors, am I capturing the upside? The answer now, I think, is no, because we're going to have to get much more used to games from Thomas that are like 7 for 70 instead of 11 for 120. Because when he was dropping 11 for 120 a touchdown, listen, I don't care how deep his routes are down the field. Like, that's a fantastic stat line, getting that many targets. But the touchdowns, again, coming down, receptions coming down, which means the yards will come down because he's not hitting on deep balls. Again, he's already 28, and with those other risk factors involved, like, I just don't see his long-term value in Dynasty being a 1. And so if you can get a 1 for him, there's no way. Here's just the final point on that. You're not trading him away, and then all of a sudden he has a good season. You're like, dang it, I should have held on to him. You're still getting a 1. Like, that's the thing, is his value is a wide receiver 1, so you're still getting something really nice in return. And so I think at worst, that's a lateral move if he performs this well moving forward. But the more likely outcome is if you get wide receiver 1 value in return for Michael Thomas, you're making out on that deal. And so I think that's the biggest thing to take away there, is that there's really no risk in trading him away, but there is risk in keeping him because his value could plummet this next season. Next up, we've got Juju, and I think this one will come as probably the biggest surprise of the video with a lot of people, but hear me out. So currently being valued as like a wide receiver 2, like a mid to low end wide receiver 2, and while that might seem like solid value, it's really not. So he has the really nice rookie season, and then he breaks out playing across from Antonio Brown in 2019. Then he busted. Or excuse me, that was 2018. So 2017 has a really nice rookie season. 2018 breaks out across from Antonio Brown. 2019, we see Antonio Brown leave, and then he has a busted season. And then he has another disappointing season this past year, gaining less than 850 yards despite 97 receptions. I mean, that's kind of crazy. 97 receptions, had less than 850 receiving yards. He was very clearly behind DeVante Johnson when they were both healthy. And there were definitely stretches this season, which is crazy to think about, that Claypool was being featured over him. And you say, okay, but I mean, he's going to be changing teams, right? Like, he's a free agent. It's pretty unlikely the Steelers are going to go out there and pay what the market is going to be offering Juju, because they have Claypool. They have James Washington. They have Deontay Johnson. Why would they go out and pay a bunch of money for Juju? So, yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. But we can't be sure. I mean, from interviews, it seems like Juju really wants to stay, and he definitely is going to take a discount. So that's 100% going to happen. Like, if what's looking like the Raiders are the top team out for him right now, if they offer him, a good chunk of change, and the Steelers can even get close to that, he's going to stay in Pittsburgh. He wants to stay in Pittsburgh. The question really is, what's that gap going to be? Because 100% chance the Steelers are not going to offer him exactly what the market is. What's the gap? And if the gap isn't that big, then he might stay. So he really just might not leave. But if he does, is he really going to get an upgrade? I mean, like I said, the number 1 team right now is the Raiders, and there's no way that he is a wide receiver 2 in Dynasty if he signs for the Raiders. I mean, the Steelers just had 3 more pass attempts per game than any other team, including 8 more pass attempts per game than the Raiders. And it's not like he'd be the very clear target leader. I mean, they have a ton of different weapons. They're very okay with spreading the ball around there. Like I said, they're going to run the ball more. They're going to throw the ball less than Pittsburgh. So sure, I mean, he could go to a great situation in free agency and his value goes up. But I think that's the overwhelmingly less likely outcome. I think most likely, honestly, is that he takes a discount and stays, in which case there's a very real chance that he is the 3rd best wide receiver in fantasy this next season on the Steelers. Because Deontay Johnson will be better in fantasy. There is a very, very strong chance that Chase Claypool takes a step forward and he's better in fantasy. And so are you really wanting the 3rd best receiver on the team as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy? Probably not. Next likely outcome is that he goes to the Raiders. I mean, they have a ton of weapons. They're not going to throw the ball as much. He's not going to be featured. And so I don't see why he'd be a 2 there. And so we look at like the third most likely outcome is that he goes to a situation that'll improve his outlook in fantasy. Why would you not want to see what you can get? And if you can get wide receiver 2 value for him, it's the same thing as with Michael Thomas. That's kind of looking like his ceiling. And so if you can get his ceiling, you're avoiding all of that floor. And so I would do that. It's definitely a worst case scenario lateral move if you get him for 2 value. Another wide receiver I'd sell is Kenny Golladay. Now, you definitely won't be selling high on him because he was injured most of last season. But honestly, his long-term outlook is just so murky. And I don't think people realize like how far in his career he is. Like, he's going to be 28 partway through the next season, which like in and of itself, 28 is not too old, but it's absolutely older than most people think. He was a 24-year-old rookie, but then missed, a good chunk of that season with a pretty significant hamstring injury. He breaks out in his sophomore season, 5 touchdowns, a little over 1,000 yards, and then he gains just under 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns in 2019. So we're looking at trajectory. That's the word I'm looking for. We're looking at trajectory in his rookie season where it's like, he's really old, he's getting injured, then he breaks out, then he has a monster season. So we're doing something like this, right? But again, that first season, he was 24. And he's now missed 17 games due to injury across these first 4 seasons while being limited in a number of games that he was technically healthy in. He's a very talented player. And he has the skill set to produce wide receiver 1 seasons. But the industry has him ranked as a wide receiver 2 in Dynasty, and that's just a little bit too aggressive. He has been an injury risk in his prime, and he's going to be past that very soon. So that does not give me a lot of confidence in him. Plus, how many more seasons can we really assume that he's going to play? Again, he's only played 4 seasons, but he was an incredibly old rookie. In 2 years, T. Higgins is going to be as old as Golladay was as a rookie. In 2 years, that'll be the case. DJ Moore is still younger than Golladay was as a rookie. Jamar Chase is 5 years younger than Golladay. You got to think long-term in Dynasty. Golladay has 1 top 20 season under his belt thus far in his career, and he's turning 28. So why is he ranked inside the top 20 in Dynasty? Especially right now. He could go anywhere in free agency, and there are very few spots that would be an upgrade over what he's had thus far. In a high volume passing attack, a aggressive offense with a very, very good quarterback in Stafford. If he stays, he's getting a downgrade. If he leaves, he's probably getting a downgrade. There are very, very few situations where you're going to be like, oh, this is way better than when he was on the Lions with Stafford. That's not going to be the case. And so when people have that in their mind, don't realize how old he is because he hasn't been in the league that long, I really think you can get wide receiver 2 value for him, and that's ridiculous because that's just not what he's worth. Another receiver I'll be looking to trade away is DeVante Parker. And there are 2 reasons for this, neither of which is talent. I do believe that he's a very talented wide receiver, so don't think that it's that. My issue mainly revolves around his situation. Now, Tua could absolutely end up being a great quarterback, but he certainly wasn't good this last season. So we thought Tua was going to be, the quarterback of the future for Miami. And again, that could still be the case. But it's possible that he's just not as good as we thought he was going to be, and that Parker is still going to have to deal with mediocre quarterback play, at least while he remains on the Dolphins. And that would be a concern because, he's signed through 2023. Like, he's not going to be a free agent until he's 31 years old. And yes, that means he's also currently 28. The other issue is that the Dolphins, we looked at last season, we're like, they're locked into him, right? Because they didn't draft any wide receivers. They didn't bring anyone real in free agency. And then they signed him long term, and it's like, oh my goodness, he's clearly the alpha. And he was this last season. But they have talked about adding another receiver in either the draft or free agency, and it hasn't been like, oh yeah, we're really looking to like bolster our depth with like a wide receiver 4 or a new 3. Like, they're looking to bring someone in who's going to compete with Parker. And the moment they do that, his value tanks in Dynasty. I mean, just imagine if they take, a top 10 receiver in the draft. Or imagine if they go out and they get Allen Robinson or they get Kenny Golladay. I'm not saying those things are going to happen, but there are so many different things that could happen, and it's seeming like one of them is going to. So I just think there are multiple factors that just don't bode great for DeVante Parker. And so if you can look at this last season, that while it was up and down, it was still a really nice year. I think we sell high on that value, and I would look to move on from him. If you've captured this breakout in Dynasty, it's finally happened, try and sell high, because I just don't see him sustaining this value moving forward. He could, but I think it's a less likely outcome. Final guy we'll go over today is Julio Jones. And I know most of you are like, well, obviously we're not targeting Julio Jones in Dynasty. I understand that. But every league has to have Julio Jones owner, and so I'm sure some of you are in that situation. Here's the deal. He's 32. And so his value in a Dynasty startup is incredibly low. But I don't think, with all these other 4 players I've said, you can just look at where he's going in startups and be like, okay, that's kind of where I should value him in free agency. I think it's a little bit different with Julio, because there are absolutely teams that are in win now mode. Like, people still draft in Dynasty thinking, okay, I'm going to actually try and win this first season. But more often than not, people are still thinking very long term in a startup draft, and so he does get pushed towards the end. But when you're in the Dynasty League, you're in year 3, 4, 5, there are people who just come to a season and they're like, listen, I'm built for now. I'm trying to win this season, and they're much, much more willing to do a trade for Julio. So do some self-evaluation. Do you have a legitimate chance to win this season? Like, everyone's going to try and win, but you're definitely in a few Dynasty leagues, and you're looking at one of them like, listen, I love my future. I love the next 2, 3, 4 years. This season, probably not going to win. And if you're in that situation and you've got Julio Jones, why on earth would you keep him on your team? Especially because there is going to be another team in your league who does think they can win right now. And if that's the case for someone, well, then why on earth would you not trade them Julio, get an asset for the future? They're happy because they can win now. You're happy because you've built for the future. You didn't just waste a season with Julio on your roster. Every league is different. Every team within that league is different. And so everyone's going to value him differently. Don't think that you're just going to blindly send trades and be like, no one's accepting my trade for Julio, but you're sending him to teams that aren't absolutely trying to win now. You got to identify the 1 or 2 teams in your league that are trying to win this season. They're much more likely to get a deal done, and they're much more likely to pay a higher price because it's still a championship. At the end of the day, we're still trying to win. You can build as much for the future as you want, but if this is your season that you've built towards, try and win. Right? And so there are absolutely owners out there who want Julio Jones this season, so find them. So those are 5 players that I would be selling high on in Dynasty Leagues. We will do running backs next week, and I'll be doing a Dynasty video every single week for the next few months, so make sure you're subscribed if you want to see that. And remember the discount on the website right now, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Any package before May 1st, you sign up using promo code FFA, you're going to get 15% off. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.